Jesus unveils the mysteries of his death and resurrection to them. He says to the two disciples, "You are slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Ought not Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory?" He expounded to them the scriptures about himself. He says to the 11, "All things must be fulfilled, which were written in the law of Moses, in the prophets, and in the Psalms concerning me." Jesus attempts to allay their fears and to let them know that God's plan is being fulfilled through his death and resurrection. When you live in relationship with God, there will be times when God's plans and activities will not be clear to you. In this journey, we must trust God every step of the way. Some things just don't make sense to us. God's delays can be baffling. However, God lets us know his will at the appropriate time. He gives spiritual insight and direction to his people. You can trust God to help you in his own time. Understanding God's plan regarding Jesus' death and resurrection is important. This knowledge empowers you to present the message of salvation to others. With this in mind, Jesus opened the disciples' understanding to the scriptures. Jesus says to them, "Thus or in this manner it is written that Christ must suffer and rise from the dead on the third day." Isaiah promised that the suffering, or prophesied that the suffering servant would be rejected and afflicted. He would also carry our sorrows and griefs. He was wounded for our transgressions and bruised for our iniquity. Isaiah goes on to say that he was cut off out of the land of the living and made his grave with the wicked and the rich. Using the Isaiah 53rd passage and many other scriptures, we can better understand Jesus' point about his sufferings and death. Jesus' resurrection was affirmed by the scriptures. On the day of Pentecost, Peter quoted a psalm of David that mentions the Messiah as not being left in the grave, nor would his body see corruption. Peter says that David saw beforehand that God would raise up Christ to sit on his throne. Peter gladly proclaimed that this Jesus, as declared by David, has God raised up, and we are all witnesses. Peter concludes that Jesus rose from the dead on the third day, according to the scriptures. He was raised before the decomposition of his body. On some level, this usually occurs during a 3 to 5 day period after death. David adds, "I foresaw the Lord, the Messiah, ever before me, that I should not be moved." The certainty of Jesus' resurrection and exaltation is prophesied in Scripture. He suffered and died to enter his glory. We have a definite report to convey along with the message of salvation. We must tell the world that Jesus suffered, died, and rose from the dead as prophesied. Peter says that these things happen according to the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God. He says, wicked people crucified Jesus, but God raised him up. it was not possible that Jesus be held by the pains of death. God had determined it. God had planned it. When the time came, death had to release its grip on Jesus. No grave could hold his body down. God raised him up. The resurrection event fully supports the message of salvation. Jesus' sufferings, resurrection, and exaltation to the seat of power is the heart and soul of our proclamation.